Good morning and welcome to the 7th meeting of this committee in 2021. Our main public business today is an evidence session with the Chief Executive of the Scottish National Party. Can I begin by saying that there continues to be a lot of speculation about this inquiry, and a lot of that speculation has very little to do with the remit. I would remind all those present and watching that we are bound by the terms of our remit and the relevant court orders, including the need to avoid contempt of court by identifying certain individuals, including through jigsaw identification. It's important that I remind all members and all our witnesses that we all have a personal responsibility, including making sure we comply with legal requirements, including the court orders, and to reflect the reason for such court orders in our questioning. The court orders have been made to ensure the safety and well-being of the women concerned, as well as to support confidence in the process of bringing forward criminal proceedings or complaints. Please remember that in addition to ensuring we do not risk in our questioning asking things that rerun any element of the criminal trial, we must also ensure that the privacy rights of individuals are respected. We should restrict our inquiries to matters which are necessary to fulfil our remit and limit references to private and personal information as much as possible. Our remit is to consider and report on the actions of the First Minister, Scottish Government officials and special advisers in dealing with complaints about Alex Salmond, former First Minister, considered under the Scottish Government's handling of harassment complaints involving current or former ministers, and procedure and actions in relation to the Scottish Ministerial Code. The more we get into specifics of evidence, that is time, people, cases, the more we run the risk of identifying those who made complaints. The more we ask about specific matters covered in the trial, including events explored in the trial, the more we run the risk of rerunning that trial. In questions, reference to specific dates and individuals should be avoided, and questions should be phrased in general terms where possible to avoid the risk of jigsaw identification and of complainants. I would also emphasise that the committee would be content to receive written supplementary points should any witness to this inquiry have concerns that their response may stray into this territory. With that, can I welcome back Mr Peter Murrell, Chief Executive of the Scottish National Party, and I would begin by inviting Mr Murrell to take the oath. May I ask you please, Mr Murrell, to raise your right hand and then repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God that I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I swear by Almighty God that I shall tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And can I invite you, Mr Murrell, to make an opening statement?
Thank you, Convener. As you know, I have provided written evidence now on 4 occasions in the past 6 months. 2 months ago exactly, I answered questions for an hour and a half and gave comprehensive answers to all the questions asked of me. Since being here on the 8th of December, the committee sought written clarification on some points of detail, which I provided on January the 13th. It remains the case that the SNP holds no information relevant to the complaints made under the Scottish Government procedure. Neither I nor the SNP was involved in any aspect of the committee's remit. It is therefore not entirely clear to me what more I can add today. However, I am happy to help if I can, and will answer any questions as far as I'm able to. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr Murrell. And we will move directly to questions. And first of all, I have our Deputy Convener, Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Mr Murrell. When you last appeared before the committee, you confirmed you've been the SNP Chief Executive Officer for the last 20 years. The committee has heard evidence that the complaints made against Alex Salmond during the development of the claims handling procedure led to the former First Minister being included in that finalised procedure. In your submission of 2nd of October, you state, "Neither I nor my staff were involved in the development of the Scottish Government procedure or the handling of the complaints made under it." If the committee has evidence that suggests otherwise, I would be grateful if you could put that to me in order that I can respond. I cannot provide material which, because we had no involvement, does not exist. Is it still your position that no such material exists?
It is.
In your previous evidence session, you were also asked about 2 text messages sent by you on the 25th of January 2020, the day of the former First Minister's first appeared in court on criminal charges. The official report lists the texts in full, but they include a reference to it being a good time to be pressurising the police, and says the more fronts he has to fight on, the better. Your explanation for the text referred to in your evidence and by the First Minister in Parliament was that the messages suggest how upset you were at the time, given you'd been working for the former First Minister for 30 years. The credibility of this explanation is in question, especially given that you're referred to as Chief Executive Officer of the SNP 3 times in material listed 4A to 4F, which a High Court ruling of the 19th of January 2021 deemed not to be relevant to an alleged breach of Section 11 of the Contempt of Court Act 1981. This material is evidence of your attitude and feelings towards the former First Minister. Is it your position this material does not and never did exist?
I'm not actually sure what material you're referring to. I'm not aware of a court order in that respect or court discussion.
Material referred to in a hearing to consider an application for disclosure of the petition and complaint proceeding raised by the Crown against Craig Murray. 19th of January 2021, High Court ruling thereof.
I'm not aware of that at all.
Can I ask that you check? I can refer exactly to the materials. 4A, a series of written communications between you and another senior SNP official, you as Chief Executive Officer of the SNP, in which they discussed purpose of a meeting between an SNP staff member and one of the complainers in the HM Advocate versus Samuel trial, and expressed their dissatisfaction at the outcome of the meeting. A communication from another SNP official to you as Chief Executive, in which a view was expressed as to the progress of the case against Mr. Salmond, and in which this Chief Officer of the SNP expressed a view that if she was told what evidence was needed, she would be able to obtain it, and text between you as the Chief Executive Officer and another SNP officer in which certain views were expressed.
I think you're getting into sort of selective quoting of text messages and discussion of leaks and false allegations. I've not seen the material that you're referring to. I think are you drifting into messages between myself and a member of staff, which
I'm drifting
Can I intervene here, please, Ms. Mitchell? I'm not sure this is within our remit at all.
It refers to the previous evidence, convener, and I'm happy for Mr. Murrow to go and reflect on what I've asked him today and get back to the committee about the existence of the text.
Well, can I say then that what we will do in this regard is discuss this as a committee, and if we feel it is within remit, we can ask Mr. Murrow to respond in writing.
It would be rather good if we could get an answer for him now. These were all referred to in the official report, convener, so I see no reason why Mr. Murrow shouldn't be asked to confirm or deny the existence of these of this material listed in this High Court hearing on the 19th of January.
I think Mr. Murrow has said that he's a bit confused about what's being discussed and not quite sure, so I think it's only fair under the terms of how we operate to allow the witness to look at this and come back to us if the committee makes the decision that this is within remit, we shall write to Mr Murrell about that. Is that satisfactory to you, Mr Murrell?
Yes, indeed, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Have you concluded, Ms Mitchell?
I have. I'll only add that it was a material that was looked at in regards to the evidence led about a conspiracy theory. Thank you.
Well, okay, yeah, sorry,
Yes, I mean, Mr Murrell.
Well, there was no conspiracy. I think you need to be careful with your selective quoting of messages in social media, leaks and false allegations. I mean, I think the committee last week looked at material and decided itself that the evidence that it was looking at was not relevant to the committee's inquiry. And, I think on the two occasions that the complainers' voices have been heard in the committee by them writing to the committee, they have expressed concern about some of the comments from committee members about these selective messages and suggestions that are made on social media about false allegations. So I think we need to be very careful about the privacy of the complainers here, and I mean, they all came forward on the basis of that their rights would be protected, their privacy would be protected, and that the judicial system would stand by them and make sure that they were able to maintain anonymity. And I think committee members here are drifting into areas where there's an agenda at play, which I think there's a very clear agenda at play in some parts of social media to name the women, and I don't think that the committee or I should be involved in assisting that.
Mr Murrell, thank you. I have allowed that statement, and that's fine. But it is up for the committee to decide what evidence it feels is relevant and to decide its own actions. So we'll end that part there, and I'll now move on to Alice Colham.
Thank you very much, Convener. Good morning, Mr Murrell. Thank you for returning to see us. I'd like to ask, if I may, specifically about the meetings or the meeting of the 2nd of April. I've got a range of questions. They're quite quick fire, so it's really quite simple yes or no initially. There might be need for you to expand, and then I might like you to bring me back in, Convener, later on if I may. But I'll start with this. So you were clear to us that even though you are the Chief Executive of the Scottish National Party, your wife, Nicola Sturgeon, is the leader of the SNP and First Minister of Scotland, that she does not ever discuss government business with you. That is correct, isn't it?
It is.
Yes. It's unremarkable and presumably relatively normal for you, however, as when you're at home to discuss party as opposed to government business. When you're at home, indeed you've said as much, or you both sort of hinted at that in media interviews. Given your jobs, that would be impossible to avoid, would it not?
It's not as common as you're suggesting. I mean, we're busy, as I think I explained last time, the amount of time that we have together is very limited. So, if we spend the day, spend the small parts of the evening or the early parts of the morning discussing our work, then there isn't much space left. So we don't rerun things. We try and move forward.
But big party events, things that are critical for going well, whether that's eve of poll or the eve of a party conference, I imagine it's quite hard not to discuss that over the breakfast table, as it were.
Well, if there's party business to be discussed, then it would be discussed at a meeting, which there would be more than myself at. So it would happen in the normal working day as part of anything else.
I'm just talking about informal chat. Anyway, I'll move on. When you gave evidence to us on the 8th of December, you told me that the first indication you and the First Minister had of the Sky News story about Mr Salmon's alleged conduct at the airport was from an email from one of the SNP's parliamentary press officers. Am I right in thinking that the Sky News story was, from your point of view, party business? It was something relevant to your work?
Yes, I mean, it was an inquiry, a media inquiry about a former leader.
Yeah. And in the same vein, if there had been a complaint raised directly about Mr. Salmon's alleged conduct arising from the events the Sky News inquiry was about, that too would have been party business, wouldn't it? I mean, if it was a complaint made to the SNP.
Well, I think the committee has sought evidence from an individual who was alerted to the incident at Edinburgh Airport, and that has been provided to the committee.
But if you could answer the question, I mean, if a complaint is made to the party, you don't give it to anybody else. The party has to deal with it through the processes that you outlined last time.
Well, any inquiry is looked at and thought through and action.
Party business. No, that's helpful. So you told the committee in your third written piece of evidence that on the evening of Sunday, April 1st, in 2018, the First Minister told you that Mr. Salmon would be visiting your home and that you, quote, had the sense that something serious was being discussed. Nicola told me she couldn't discuss the details. The nature of Nicola's job means that when she tells me she can't discuss something, I don't press it. That's still your position, yes?
Well, I think you're conflating two different conversations. On the Sunday evening, Nicola mentioned Alec would be popping in the next day, coming into the house. The latter comments that you're making there were, after the meeting had taken place. So,
yeah, I should have been clearer in my questioning, but you're quite right. That was a statement after the fact. And again, when you gave evidence on 8th December, I asked you a question about whether, when she spoke to you, the First Minister might have given you an idea of what was said at the meeting. And I want to ask you about an aspect of your answer. The official report records the first part of your answer as, I will try to set out what happened. Given that other individuals were there, what was triggered in my head was that the Sky News inquiry was perhaps coming back. She said that it was not, and that she could not discuss what the meeting was about. That is the point from which I did not probe any further. Obviously, that was after the fact as well. On 1st April, was it right to assume that you inferred that the meeting the following day was not about the Sky News inquiry or anything else which might be party business? Otherwise, she would have mentioned why Mr. Salmon was coming. Is that not correct?
I mean, it was limited to the fact that Alec was popping in. It could have been about anything, and it wasn't an unusual event. So, he was just popping in.
Okay, so to confirm, it's reasonable to believe that if Nicola Sturgeon thought the meeting was a matter of importance to the party, that she might have shared that with you in the night before on April 1st.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think he was popping in. I mean, I don't think.
I understand.
I understand. And it didn't think anything of it, so I didn't ask.
I understand. Okay. So because she didn't tell you what she thought it was going to be about, do you think that's because she knew it was going to be about government business, specifically her government's investigation into Alex Salmond, and absolutely nothing to do with party business?
Well, I think as we covered back 2 months ago as well, of Nicola will be here next week, and the only view that really counts here is her view. It's not for me to speculate or determine the basis of nature of things I wasn't involved in. So, she'll be here next week, and you can ask her what she thought was the position going into the meeting.
I understand, and I fully accept that. My final question for now, convener, if I may, and this is what these questions have all been leading up to, because this is the thing that really doesn't sit well with me. In her written evidence to the committee, Nicola Sturgeon said that prior to the meeting of the 2nd of April, she thought, and I quote, that Mr. Salmond may be about to resign from the SNP. As leader of the party, I considered it important that I knew if this was in fact the case, in order that I could prepare the party to deal with what would have been a significant issue. So that was her view before the 2nd of April. Mr. Morrow, you are chief executive of the SNP. Surely nobody prepares your party for anything that big without your involvement, particularly if they share a house with you, do they?
Well, Nicola is the leader of the party, and what she tells me is really a matter for her. I mean, it's we went through this last time on the 8th of December, where you were referring to how the Liberal Democrats, manage their media operation. I mean, as I think I said at the time, it's, I think if you're you deal with things, certainly in government, you deal with things when they arise. The same is true of the party, that when things come to A4, that you deal with them at that point. You don't deal with things in advance. You deal with them as they come down the track at you. So it's that's just the way of it. It's just how it works.
Well, thank you for that. But again, I really struggle with this because, yes, that's the case. That in the cut and thrust of a life in politics and passing like ships in the night, as you must often do with the First Minister, and not wanting to talk about politics all the time, I can understand that you don't, readily embrace the topic of party business. But this isn't like run-of-the-mill party business. This is potentially one of the biggest blows to befall your party in its history. That one of its most celebrated leaders, one of its most successful leaders, was on the point of resigning, and with it potentially taking a huge faction of members with him. If that was what Nicola Sturgeon attests was her principal concern for what that meeting was going to be about, I just don't find it credible that she wouldn't have discussed that with you as chief executive, even just to take your mind on it, to take advice.
Well, again, at that point, Nicola hadn't talked to Alex, so she didn't talk to him until that day. So what he was planning to say to her, he knew, and she, as she set out in her evidence, thought that he may be about to resign from the party. But, until actually that conversation took place, then you just don't know what the situation is.
But husbands and wives share things, partners share things. I would, if the role was reversed, if it was something that big in my party, I would be feeling a knot in the pit of my stomach about this. I'd be wanting to speak to my wife about the anxiety I had, thinking, oh my goodness, there is an iceberg coming for our party, and we need to game out what we're going to do. I'm sorry, Mr. Morrow, I just don't believe it.
Well, I mean, I think you're coming to it from a position of, well, anyway, but by the by, I think Nicola will be here next week. You can ask her what she thought and what she thought in advance of the meeting and afterwards, and what happened at the meeting. But, I can just tell you what I knew, and that is that he was coming to the House, and that was all I knew at the time. So.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Cole-Hamilton, you've had quite a stretch there. I don't know if I'll be able to bring you back in because we're a bit short of time. I'll do my best. Can I go now, please, to Murdo Fraser?
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Mr. Murrell.
Good morning.
I wonder if I can try and just clarify some issues arising from your previous evidence on the 8th of December. And maybe just to put this in context, you'll be aware, this committee is trying to get to the truth of some very serious matters that relate to complaints made by women in the Scottish Government who have been treated very badly and still have not had any satisfaction in relation to complaints they made due to failures in the Scottish Government. And to try and achieve that, all the witnesses who are speaking to this inquiry are giving evidence under oath, which is very unusual, as you know, in a parliamentary inquiry. But the purpose of the oath is very clear. And indeed, it is a criminal offence to give false information under oath under Section 44, subsection 1 of the Criminal Law Consolidation Scotland Act 1995, which states that any person who is required or authorised by law to make a statement on oath for any purpose and being lawfully sworn wilfully makes a statement which is material for that purpose and which he knows to be false or does not believe to be true shall be guilty of an offence and liable on conviction to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 5 years, or to a fine or to both such fine or imprisonment. And I mention that because it puts into context the importance of evidence being given to this committee to be accurate and truthful. Now, can I go back to the issue of the meeting on the 2nd of April held in your home between the First Minister and Mr. Salmon? Because on the 8th of December, I asked you about this, and I quote directly from the official report, and you said, "I was not at home, and I was not aware of the capacity in which she, the First Minister, was having these meetings. and you then repeated that. You said, I was not at home during either meeting, which is either the meeting on the 2nd of April or the meeting on the 14th of July. You then said, in relation to Mr. Salmon, I was not really aware he was coming to the House on the first occasion, that is the 2nd of April. But then subsequently in that session, in response to questions from my colleague, Mr. Andy Whiteman, you said, I knew in advance the meeting was going to happen. You knew about it the day before. And then when Mr. Whiteman asked you whether you were at home on the 2nd of April, you said, I arrived home not long before the meeting ended. So you've given this committee under oath 2 different accounts of the meeting of the 2nd of April, both in relation to your knowledge of it in advance and to whether you were in the House. So can you tell us which of these accounts is true and which is false?
I think, as I made clear at the time, I wasn't at the meeting, and I didn't know what the meeting was about. So, I happened to arrive home just before the meeting finished, and I came in the door, acknowledged the people that were in one room, didn't see Alec or Nicola at that point, and went upstairs to change. And by the time I'd done that, they had left. So I just wasn't at home. In terms of as I think I've made clear several times now that Alec being here in the House was not an uncommon thing, and I really didn't know what the meeting was about in advance. So I think when you're giving evidence and you're being questioned in this fashion, that it's difficult to go back to the point of what you knew when and take it back, what I know now, as opposed to what I knew back then. And I think what I was trying to refer to was the fact that I didn't, now we know, because there are bits of evidence that suggest what the meeting was about. We now know this. Back then, I didn't know any of it. So, I was just trying to explain the situation that was occurring at that point, which was that, I didn't know what the meeting was about. I didn't really know that, that there was going to be. I think there were additional people here in the House that I wasn't expecting to see, and that's, I think I was referring to that kind of situation where, I come home and I find I was, I had expected, I think, that Alec would be gone. I think the meeting was meant to happen earlier, but he was late. But there were people here that I wasn't expected to be here at all. So that's, the situation I was explaining to Mr. Whiteman at that point.
So, Mr. Morrow, when you told me in response to my question and giving evidence to me under oath that you were not at home during the meeting, and when you told me you were not really aware that Mr. Salmon was coming to the House, you were giving us false information, having sworn an oath to tell the truth.
No, because I wasn't aware that the meeting was for a purpose. I just thought he was popping in for a chat about any matter, so it wasn't. I had no awareness of the fact that it was a meeting for a purpose. I thought he was just coming in for a catch-up with Nicola. It's pretty simple. I think you're trying to suggest things that, or knowledge that, I just don't have about these things.
I'm trying to suggest, Mr. Morrow, you've made an untruthful statement to this committee, which is self-evident.
I don't think so.
By your own word. You said you told me.
I wasn't. I wasn't at the meeting. I wasn't. I wasn't at the meeting.
Excuse me. Can we stop, because one voice is interfering with another? So can I ask you to make your statement again, Mr. Fraser, and then we'll go on to Mr. Murrow to make his. Murrow Fraser.
Okay. Thank you, Convener. Mr. Murrow, I'm quoting from page 12 of the official report. When I asked you, I said to you, you were not in the House at the time, and you said, I was not at home during either meeting. That was a false statement. Yes or no?
I refuse.
Mr. Murrow.
Yes or no, Mr. Murrow? It's not a difficult question.
Well,
was that a false statement?
Mr. Fraser, please let Mr. Murrow answer. Mr. Murrow.
I have no idea how long the meeting lasted. I wasn't here for any part of the meeting. I happened to arrive home just as the meeting was finishing. That, that's all I can say. I mean, that, it's not complicated. It's, I absolutely refute that, what's being suggested, but, I just happened to arrive home as the meeting was ending.
Well, you might be refuting what's suggested, Mr. Murrell, but you're refusing to answer a very simple question, which is whether your statement on the 8th of December to me, under oath, that you were not at home during the meeting is true. And I'll ask you again, is that statement true, yes or no?
I wasn't at the meeting.
That's not the question I'm asking you. All right, let me move on, because we're getting nowhere here.
Yeah, please do, Mr. Fraser.
Can I ask you about your understanding of the capacity in which that meeting was held? Because we haven't heard, but we've seen the written evidence from the First Minister that she was clear the meeting was not held on government business. She took no action consequent to that meeting. When we heard from John Summers, the Principal Private Secretary to the First Minister, he said the meeting had not been in the ministerial diary, and the Ministerial Code at paragraph 423 makes clear if it had been a government meeting, a note should have been prepared back to the private office, and that did not happen. But in your evidence to me, again on the 8th of December, and again I'm quoting from the official report at page 14, you were clear that what was being discussed at that meeting was a Scottish government matter. Is that still your position?
I mean, my evidence was reflecting, my impression, but it's not for me, to speculate the basis or the nature of the meeting. That's, for the First Minister, and she'll be here next Tuesday, and you can ask her these questions. Her decision on the nature of the meeting is the only thing that matters here. So you should ask that that witness the question.
Well, we will.
Otherwise, it's merely speculation on my part.
Well, we will, Mr. Murrell.
Coupled with the interpretation of her written evidence on the matter, it's I read it, and I was clear on the 8th of December as to what my interpretation was.
Yes, indeed, and you told me it was a Scottish government meeting. Now we will ask the.
I didn't say that. I did say
that. Stop again, both of you, please. Mr. Fraser, we're rapidly using up all the time, and I have other members who want to speak. So could you articulate your last question, please? And if Mr. Murrell would then respond.
Thank you, Convener. A very simple question. Mr. Murrell has said several times that it's not for him to speculate on the nature of that meeting. But he didn't just speculate, he was definitive in response to a question from me on the 8th of December. I asked about the meeting, he said it was a Scottish government matter. So he has already set out a view on this. All I'm asking is, does he stand by the view he set out to us under oath on the 8th of December?
Well, I think, as I've already said, speculation on my part, having read her evidence. I mean, we now know the matter that was raised at that meeting, which was to do with complaints. So, and those complaints were under the Scottish Government procedure.
I'm afraid, Mr. Murrell, having called you back to try and clarify your evidence, you're not helping us one little bit. You haven't clarified anything, frankly. Thank you, Convener.
Right, I'll move on. Can I have Alistair Allen, please?
Thank you, Convener. Mr. Murrell, while I have some sympathy for the point you made about why this committee should not be trawling through the lives of the women concerned, I do want to ask you about something, and it's about the email you provided to the committee since your last appearance. This was an email sent by the First Minister in her capacity as party leader on the 27th of August regarding the position that the party was going to take in relation to Mr. Salmond. Now, that sets out that the party couldn't suspend or expel Mr Salmond from party membership at that time for two reasons. First, the letter said that the Permanent Secretary's investigation, which had upheld sexual harassment allegations against him, was not conducted by the party. And secondly, because what limited information that the First Minister had about the complainant, against Alex Salmond, could not be shared with the party for legal reasons. Have I got that correct before I move on?
Yeah, that's the text of the email, yes.
Well, I want to ask you in that case why the email was sent. First, those issues was, were there calls within the party that action should be taken against the former First Minister in light of the reports there were about how the government had received the complaint?
There were multiple media inquiries and opposition calls for him to be suspended from the party at that point.
Well, the other issue related to that in that case is, I am assuming that there was a wish to reassure the wider membership of the party that, irrespective of the situation with Mr Salmond, the party was going to take action to stand up for those who had experienced sexual harassment. Was there a sense among party leaders that there was a need to provide members more generally with reassurance on that wider issue?
Yes, I think you saw that last week as well, that when some of the women whose messages were shared with the committee last week, issued a statement there where any discussion in the public sphere of allegations of sexual harassment, does have a massive impact on complainers, not just in the specific case, but in a wider sense in the community. I mean, I think I'd noticed that one of the helplines had opened up last Tuesday evening, I think it was, because any discussion about sexual harassment in the public sphere does spark concerns and distress for women who have experienced this in all sorts of different aspects of work life, personal life. So, there was a wider sense, and we had an awareness within the party that, because of the public profile of that complaint at that time, that it would spark a wider concern about historic sexual harassment. And, I think it was felt that we needed to make sure that it was seen that the SNP had ways in which people could share that information or could seek help if they were distressed. So, it's quite an important thing for organisations to do when, sexual harassment is in the sort of public conversation.
Well, you mentioned that there was a public conversation about these issues. That by this point, the government and the Parliament were moving to take the issues of sexual harassment seriously. Did you feel at that point, or was the purpose behind the letter the need to indicate that the party was, I don't want to say catching up with those developments, but aware of them?
Well, it was a repeat, of course, of because in earlier evidence, that same information was shared much earlier, back when the Me Too movement was, in the public conversation before, in the sort of latter part of 2017. So it is the same information that we just shared again at that point, because it was back in the news.
And finally, Convener, you have, as I say, recently provided this letter or added it to your evidence, I think. If it's relevant to agreement, do you recall if there were responses to this letter? And did they say anything of significance?
I don't think the responses were to that. I think, but the government, because I think the similar question was asked of the government, and I think the fact that there was public conversation about the complaint that had appeared, I think, in one of the newspapers about Mr. Salmond, it sparked a number of women to come forward in the government sphere, but they were, I think, if I recall correctly, it was suggested that they weren't. It wasn't just about Alex Salmond. So information like this tends to generate different responses. But I mean, in terms of the SNP, I'm not aware that things came to us straight after this email going out.
Thank you, Convener.
Okay, can I move please to Jackie Bailey?
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to Mr. Morrow. Can I take you back to your evidence of 8th of December to this committee, where I asked about the existence of other text or WhatsApp messages concerning the allegations made about Alex Salmond. You will recall the committee saw 2 of those messages between yourself and an officer of the SNP, and at the time you said to me, and I quote, "No, not that I am aware of." Is that correct?
I have your, I'm just looking at that section here just now, but I mean, you asked whether there was any relevant information, and there wasn't, and there still isn't.
No, I didn't ask about relevant information. I asked if there were other text messages that related to the allegations made about Alex Salmond. I was very clear, and in fact, I pursued you over several questions asking whether there were any other messages.
Column 24 of my oral evidence from yourself, no other relevant information was found. Can you repeat that under oath? And I said
that's not the only place. That's not the only place, with respect to Mr. Morrow, that I asked you that. Let me take you back to your own evidence to the committee, where you stated that you had consulted with senior officers in terms of evidence to the committee. Isn't it the case that there were further messages involving you and those senior officers?
Well, I think if you go back to the beginning, where the committee first wrote to me in July and set out the remit for the inquiry, as part of that, I think there was information which said that evidence submitted should fall within the remit of the committee's inquiries. So roll forward to the next letter from the committee, and at that point I think you asked that I should go and confer with staff about whether there were any relevant messages, which I did. I approached every member of staff and asked if they had anything that was relevant to the remit of the inquiry, and the answer from all the staff was no, there wasn't. And that's still the position today.
Okay. Mr. Morrow, let me take you back to your own evidence to the committee, okay? Where I'm saying to you, I mean in relation to the allegations about the former First Minister Alex Salmond, and you said, and what story? And I then said, let me go back. The text messages that you sent, which we have seen, were to your Chief Operating Officer. I am asking whether there were other text messages to any other party official on the same subject. And you have said, no, not that I am aware of. So it doesn't talk about relevant documentation, doesn't talk about the committee's remit. It is very clear. And you responded no. Are you saying that your testimony then is correct?
You're saying it's clear. I would say it was confused. I mean, do you mean other? Did you mean the same official, or did you mean the other? You say other party official. You don't say the same party official. I just, I mean, the basis on which I asked staff whether there were any relevant messages was the committee's remit, and each of them came back saying they didn't have any messages that were relevant to the remit of the inquiry. And that's the basis on which I asked. If you're now asking that I should go back and ask them whether they have any messages at all, that's a different matter. So, but in terms of what I asked them was that did they have any messages relevant to the inquiry? Because that's what the inquiry asked me to do. And you have a remit, and you have a...
Mr. Morrow, and I'm very aware of...
Within remit.
Excuse me, again, could each of you stop. Could each of you stop talking over the other? Have you finished that response, Mr. Morrow?
Well,
yes. Right, back to Mr. Morrow.
Convener,
Well, it's very clear. I mean, I've just looked out Annex A of the committee's paperwork, and it says all evidence submitted should fall within the terms of the remit of the committee's inquiry. It's very clear, and the remit is just above it. And that's the document that I shared with staff.
Ms. Bailey, wait a minute. Right, Ms. Bailey.
Convener, I think people watching will see that Mr. Morrell is dancing on the head of a pin. He made no such caveats to his evidence previously, and I think this is becoming quite obstructive to the work of the committee. Can I try again? There were messages between a senior SNP officer dated 28th of January 2019. These concerned Mr. Morrell and this senior officer. It reports that an officer returned from a meeting with the complainer and reports back, and then you text this senior officer to complain about the other officer's attitude not being forceful enough to achieve the objective of having her make a police statement. You were clearly angry with him. Do you recognise this, Mr. Morrell? Did you send that message? And how does that sit with your previous evidence to the committee that there were no more messages?
I think there is a danger in, pulling material from social media, selectively quoting information, leaking, and false allegations. I mean, that is not the context of that message. And again, we're drifting into an area where we're invading the privacy of someone who we know already we've caused a great amount of stress to in the kind of probing of messages. So
I interrupt and make abundantly clear that I am not invading anybody's privacy, Mr. Morrell. I haven't named anybody. I haven't given them their job title. So I would caution you to be careful that you don't, in your own testimony, do that.
But
Can I say something here to both of you? And if we could go back to Ms. Bailey. It is actually for the committee to decide what they feel is within their remit and what is not within their remit. Having said that, Ms. Bailey, perhaps it would be useful if you could say why you believe this to be within the remit of the committee, and then we'll go back to Mr. Morrell.
Indeed, Convener, as you know, that this is based on previous evidence from Mr. Morrell, and I want to test that evidence. So it is based on his own words to this committee, and I don't think that interrupting that flow, given that he's already testified to us before on these issues, is necessarily helpful. I wonder whether I could move on. Can I take one of your text?
I'm aware of time. Yeah.
Can I take one of your text messages about the Crown Prosecution Service that you said was sent on the 26th of January 2019? I think in evidence you told us that you told about this in September 2018. Can I ask you how you became aware of a complaint from the Crown Prosecution Service? You've told us when, you haven't told us how you became aware of it.
I think that, let me just scan back to, you're inquiring, the committees, when they wrote to me on the, the 23rd of December, the question I was asked was, when did I first become aware of potential complaint from London? And that's what I had an awareness of, that there were complaints in, or a complaint from someone in London or events in London.
How did you have that awareness? Who told you?
Well,
how did you know?
I think between the period of it becoming, between the point at which it became public knowledge that there was complaints in the Scottish Government procedure against Alex Salmond, all the way through to the point at which he was charged and appeared in court, there was clearly a lot of speculation, a lot of information came to the SNP and was circulating. So clearly, at some point over that journey, I think in my oral evidence last time, we talked about the fact that there was a small number of complaints that came through the independent process that we had established for complaints. But on top of that, there were other concerns that perhaps went straight to the police or other concerns that didn't go to the police or to us, that, we were aware of lots of information coming forward, lots of different complaints coming forward, and concerns being raised by people.
Can I push you on this point? Because let me say, I've went back and checked my diary, as I promised to do. I've done a newspaper and broadcast search. This fact of the Crown Prosecution Service was not in the public domain until after Mr. Salmon's criminal trial had concluded. So can I press you, how did you know? Specifically about the Crown Prosecution Service.
I'm not really sure, I had direct knowledge of, what you're selecting, quoting from text messages, I think, and...
I'm sorry, I'm not selectively quoting, convener. I am quoting your text message about the Crown Prosecution Service.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that again, it's this thing where you're asking me to, get into the privacy issues of people who have complained to the SNP or have complained directly to the police. I mean,
I'm not asking you to do that. Well, I'm asking you how you knew.
You're asking me to do that because, that's exactly what you're doing. Because someone who had complained to the police about activity in London, you are asking me to invade their privacy and talk about their situation.
Can I intervene here? Are you saying, Mr. Murrow, that you cannot answer that question because it would invade someone's privacy? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, all of discussion about text messages and messages involving the women is invading their privacy.
This isn't about involving the women, convener. This is a message from Mr. Murrow himself. Let me move on because clearly.
Yeah, can you come to a close, please, Ms. Bailey?
Convener.
Yes, thank you.
Can I ask Mr. Murrow, is there anybody in the room with you? Because you keep looking off to the left.
Off to the left?
Yeah, is there anybody in the room with you just now?
No. Do you want me to move the camera and prove it? Yeah.
No. I just wondered.
A conspiracy you're suggesting?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Okay, can we move on, please?
There is a magpie outside here, but apart from that, there's a magpie. Well, in fact, there's two now.
Well, I'm glad there's two because it's unlucky if there's only one. Right, can we please move on? And I'm aware that we have to bring this meeting to a close very soon. So can I go please to Stuart McMillan?
Thank you, convener. Mr. Murrow, in your last appearance in front of this committee, you discussed the fact that the SNP process for dealing with cases of sexual harassment actually hadn't changed, and that you'd put in place new procedures for complaints to be reported. Now, you also said that in order for any type of change to be made, that they would have to go before the SNP conference. Can I ask, therefore, whether since your last appearance in front of this committee, there actually have been any discussions about the changes to the rulebook now that the party has got a new National Secretary?
So I think that the new National Secretary is looking at this area. There were aspects of the constitutional changes that were discussed in 2018 that hadn't yet been implemented. So I know that that's under sort of active consideration, that the complaints procedure will be looked at and refreshed, I think, in fairly short order. But the process for that, as I think I said out last time, would involve going to party conference and for the constitutional amendments to be tabled and voted on by delegates.
Okay, okay. So, but it is work that's actually currently underway.
Yes, I mean, that the new National Secretary is looking at this, and I would expect there to be a new members' code of conduct and a new disciplinary process, or at least a refreshed disciplinary process, coming forward to conference at some point.
Okay. Also, as the chief executive of any organisation which certainly has to handle complaints about sexual harassment. You'll agree, I'm sure, that it's crucial that complainers are at the heart of any complaints procedures, and also indeed inquiries about the complaints procedures. Can you tell us how you make sure that this actually is the case in the Scottish National Party?
Well, you know, it is absolutely vital that, you know, complaints are treated confidentially, and that, you know, if people want to come forward with in an anonymous way, then we try and protect that. So it's, you know, it's basic standards of good operation within organisation. So it's, you know, it's imperative that you know, people have confidence in the complaint system, and that these are advanced in good order.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add, or feel as if you need to add, with regards to the SNP's complaints or harassment procedures?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, everyone. I have no further requests, and we are almost at the close of our meeting. So, oh, now is that not typical? The minute I say that, someone comes in. Alistair Allen, please. This will have to be the last.
Thank you, Convener. Just briefly, I want to ask about something that other members have, you know, probably alluded to, but in your last appearance, you told us that you were aware that the First Minister was going to be meeting Alex Salmond on the 2nd of April, and other members have rehearsed this, I know. But you did say that you'd drawn your conclusions about what the meeting would be about, but you didn't know for certain that there would be anything out of the ordinary. After the meeting had concluded, your view, you've just told us, was that serious matters may have, or you've alluded to again, that serious matters may have been discussed, but it wasn't your place to try and find out the meeting's contents. Can you just summarise for all of us here what your understanding is of what the situation was, what your understanding of that meeting was prior to and after it taking place?
Prior to, I had no understanding. I didn't know that, you know, what the basis of the meeting was. Afterwards, because there were people there that I wasn't expecting to be there, I had, given that we'd had a media inquiry in the previous, previous year about a complaint at Edinburgh Airport, then I just, you know, I thought they may have something to do with that. That's, you know, but that's kind of when I approached Nicola about it and said, well, was about that, and she said no, but that she couldn't talk about it, and that was, you know, that was the, you know, the sum total of my knowledge.
Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And thank you very much, Mr. Murrow, for coming back and giving us further evidence today. And I now call this meeting to a close.